Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshifted.net/402, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshifted.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 402nd edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, we are getting ready for the next big adventure, and that is the Lake Ontario circumnavigation. After years of circling the ride, pun intended, I've decided it's time to do a lap around the lake that I've lived near for a fair chunk of my early years of my life. Would it have been easier to pick a smaller lake? Absolutely sure. But Lake Ontario truly is a great lake in the sense that it's surrounded by diverse and interesting places, and we are going to discover this all together. Any kind of a preview episode, we're going to go through the basics, the weather, the gear, the highlights, and the challenges. Let's start off with the basics. This is approximately 540 miles, and I think that I say approximately just because my route is subject to change for a variety of reasons. Sometimes things get foisted upon me, detours that I'm not expecting, things like that. Sometimes I just make changes in things on the fly. There are two different ways that you can do this route, basically, and one is to hug the lake as much as possible and stay on the gnarliest of roads. And then there are other ways as well where there are trails and some other things that are near enough to the lake. And I'm looking at the Erie Canal towpath as a major example of that. There's lots of different ways where I can get around the lake, but the name of the game is I'm going to try to get around the lake. And that is for 540-ish miles. By the way, things are going to get into kilometers when I go to Canada. And a kilometer, for those of you who are metric challenged, is about 0.62 miles. So that's why kilometers, the numbers are higher, but the distance is equal to miles, even though the conversion is different. I'm butchering this, but in any event, as I mentioned, Canada, there's going to be two countries. There's going to be two border crossings, one entering Canada up around Wolfe Island. I don't know if that technically counts as the Thousand Islands region, but it is close to that. It's where the St. Lawrence River enters into Lake Ontario. And then the second border crossing will be, I think, Niagara Falls. And I say I think because I've gotten at least one listener, Canadian listener, hello, who suggested crossing over in Buffalo rather than in Niagara Falls. And I'm definitely considering that. I just haven't quite decided. And I may not decide until I get later on in the ride. As I sit here right now, I have been planning for part of it, but not for all of it. I do like to get, especially with a trip like this, around a holiday. It's going to be around the American holiday of Memorial Day. I'm going to need to make sure that I'm not getting into places where I will be shut out of any lodging, particularly in some of the more rural areas. And so I think I've got that kind of covered as part of this ride. The thing that I'm really excited about is ferries. Lots of ferries. Back in February, I talked about how much I liked ferries. I'm going to have a bunch of them. I'm going to have, at least to my knowledge, 4 ferry rides. One around the border crossing, the initial border crossing into Canada. I'll be traveling by ferry to a Canadian island, and then from that Canadian island, Wolfe Island, back to the kind of mainland of Ontario. And then another very exciting one in the city of Toronto, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. So a lot of ferries will be involved, and there could be more depending on certain routes that I may choose. As I mentioned, I think in other episodes, as I gave a preview to the preview, this is going to be an all roofed lodging trip, and that is because we'll talk about it in the gear section. I am going to be needing to charge up every night, and roofed lodging makes that a lot easier. There is a wide diversity of riding that's going to be happening. I'll be going from extremely rural parts of both New York State and the province of Ontario, Canada, all the way up to arguably one of the biggest cities in the world, Toronto, Canada, certainly the biggest city in all of Canada, which is very exciting because I haven't been there in a long time. And I love Toronto. I love me some TO. It's a great place, and I'm excited to be biking there. As I mentioned, the e-bike. The e-bike is going to be the conveyance here. I'm very excited about that. More in the challenges section, of course. I will be driving up to Western New York, and that spot will be the beginning and end of my loop. It's a spot that makes a lot of sense, and it's only going to be available to me for a little bit longer in the way that I'll be using it, and more will be made clear on the first episode, which is coming at you next week. The weather. As I sit here in this preview episode, let me see here. I'll be riding. It's less than a week from when I'll be starting the ride. So I'm in for entertainment purposes only further on in the ride, but early in the ride, it looks like it's going to be, I would say, cool and very cool in the mornings. Maybe some starts in the mid 40s early on, which is fine. It's about at the edge of a sort of fun comfort level for me. But of course, it'll be warming up as the day goes on. And once I get riding, I warm up pretty quickly. So I think that waiting until this late in the spring was a really good idea. I had originally considered doing this maybe even a full month before. And boy, that would have been a terrible idea on a whole variety of levels. But weather would have definitely been that. Does look like that there's some rain around the second or third day of my ride. I suspect that the early few days, I think there's going to be a chance of rain almost at any time. And so you mix that with some cool to almost cold weather, I'm going to have to be prepared for that. We're going to be having that mixed bag of rain and dry. It does look like later on in, again, the for entertainment purposes only forecast, that we might be getting some really nice weather, maybe a little too much sun for me, but yeah. So I think it's going to be pretty good so far. It looks pretty good so far, and I'm excited about that. So that's the basics. That's the weather. Let's talk about the gear. As mentioned, the e-bike. This is by far my biggest ride yet. I did, about 75 miles on the e-bike for the shakedown ride. I'll be doing more than that every day for 6 to 7 days. So it's a challenge, and we'll get to that in the challenges section. I did a couple of things, but not probably enough things for the bike. I gave it a ride the other day and it was fine. But one thing that I made the change to before I even got on there was I pulled the Brooks saddle from my Brompton and I put it right on this bike. And I think it's going to make a big difference. I've used the stock saddle that came with it that was really not very good. And I'm usually a stock saddle guy, but this was really not great. I used another one that I'd borrowed from the Green Goblin, for that big shakedown ride, and I found that it wasn't very comfortable. So I think that this is a good idea to go to the Brooks saddle. Of course, with the rain, who knows, but I'll just try to keep it dry. I am in the process of rewrapping my bar end extenders to also improve comfort, because that was another thing that I noticed with this bike on the longer distances that really got uncomfortable over time using those. I still think that I'm so used to a narrower, I'll call it a stance, where on this bike, my wrists and my hands are actually outside of the line of my shoulders. So it's a wider grip as opposed to more kind of forward, which I've been used to for really every single bike that I've had, with maybe the exception of the Brompton. But this is an even wider stance. And of course, that's because this is a mountain bike. That's just how it's done. It's, of course, for stability. That's not as great for a longer distance ride. So it's going to be very interesting to see if at the end of this, I end up deciding, I need to do a complete change on the handlebar situation for this particular bike. But I'm hoping that the rewrapping those bar end extenders gives me two very mainly comfortable positions for my hands, and that I can rotate back and forth. Of course, I've got those faux ergon grips for the sort of upright riding. And so I think that that'll be fine. I know those are comfortable. I use those for the Brompton all the time. In a sense, this is a similar setup to what I have for the Brompton. It's just that again, I'll call it the stance, but the spread of my arms is wider than my shoulders. So we'll just see how this all ends up going. Batteries and chargers are easily the biggest weight. I have not weighed the two batteries that I have. The new one is slightly smaller than the first one that I got, but there's very heavy. They're at least 10 pounds and they're maybe closer to 15 a piece. So of course, that's a lot of weight right there. Now, one of them is going to be literally in the frame itself. Its impact will be minimized. The other one, when I'm not using it, whether it's fully charged or completely spent after I switch one out, will be on one of my panniers. So the two chargers, and yes, I do have to bring two chargers for these because they're two different charging ports. I'll probably try to figure out something on that maybe down the line and get a variable charger with multiple port options. Those are going to be in the other bag, and then I'll fill up the rest of those panniers with clothes and all those other types of things. I will say, given the weight of the batteries and presumably the water that I'll carry and things along those lines, I'm going to try to ride very light. I'm only going to bring 2 days of riding clothes, and I'll wash the set that I wear in the hotel or Airbnb on the night that I get there and hope that it completely dries out. If it doesn't, I'll have it on the bike for that second day, unless of course it's raining, and rotate through and wear the other one on that next day. So I think that'll end up being fine. I'll bring a set of what I always like to call civilian clothes for walking around town, to the extent that I will be doing any of that after riding these distances. And of course, my rain gear. I think rain gear is going to be incredibly important. I am going to consider bringing a second pair of shoes. One thing that I've done in really rainy weather is I've worn beach shoes almost, I think is the best way to put it. Surf shoes is probably another thing that people have heard before, and waterproof socks, especially if there's any day that as I get closer to it, that it looks like there's going to be like a real washout, or I'm going to have to be riding in some really downpoury kind of weather. That way it keeps the main pair of shoes that I would bring, which are typically like a pair of trail shoes, those stay a little bit drier. And I worry a little bit about that because then we start getting into bulk and I've got to keep things dry and I have a limited amount of space in those panniers. But that's what my thinking is here as we get closer and closer there. I'm going to be bringing a full set of tools with me. And when I say a full set, a full touring set of tools. I won't be bringing the big tools that I would use to take off or fiddle with the electric motor. I thought originally that I might consider doing it, but at the end of the day, that's just a ton of extra weight for something that, honestly, if something like that is happening where it's getting loose or whatever, I have bigger problems. So I think I'm going to cross my fingers and all that other good stuff and not risk taking the truly enormous and heavy tools. But I am going to be planning on bringing things like a chain breaker and stuff like that. If there's one thing that I worry about with this setup is just the wear on that chain and just the possibility of it getting chewed up or something along those lines. So I'm actually bringing a spare chain with me just to be on the safe side. I don't think I've done that in a very long time, but I do think that it's necessary for this particular trip. And it's the thing that I think is the most likely to go south other than getting a flat and needing to change things. That reminds me, actually, I have to get some tubes because I don't believe I have spare tubes in the size of these tires. So I'll have to make sure that I get those as well. Those are the two things that I think are the most likely things that would go south. But I am going to be doing some prep in advance, of course, and going through tightening down everything in advance, making sure everything is really well secured. This bike is reasonably new. It's been on very few long distance trips, just the one really. And so I do want to make sure that things are good and set and that I'm not going to be taking any chances with that. One of the things that I'll say, and I think this goes more in the challenges section, but I'll bring it here in the gear, is I'm still learning about disc brakes. And I've noticed and I've heard from many folks that they can be really challenging and they're not quite perfectly aligned. So one of the things I'm going to try to do this week is to see if I can find that magical YouTube video that makes things click for me in terms of the adjustment of these things, because it is absolutely opaque. There's multiple screws, or there's multiple things to tighten, and I'm still not sure exactly what they all are. And for those of you who've dealt with disc brakes forever and are experts in them, my hat is off to you. I hope to join you someday. I have been rim brake guy for my entire life. I've gotten really good at fixing those and making them work, and I am not there with the disc brakes. So I'm getting there, but I don't want to tinker too terribly much because I certainly don't want to make it worse. That's why, as part of the driving this bike up to Western New York, I am going to do everything I can to not take a wheel off if I can. I'm going to try to just smash the thing inside the vehicle and hope for the best. If I have to take a wheel off, that means there's always a possibility that the rim brake is going to be all messed up as it goes into the little caliper thing or whatever it's called. In any event, that's something that I would say is probably my third biggest concern. So we're looking at flats, we're looking at chains, we're looking at brakes, which honestly makes sense. That's probably for every kind of bike adventure that's out there. I'm sure it'll all work out fine. They're just certain things that I'm a little more nervous about. This is not a bike that has proven itself to me in any big way. Every other bike that I have, the other 3 bikes, they've gone on big ticket adventures and they've done really well for me. And so this is the one that's going to prove this bike for me, the e-bike. Let's talk about the highlights because I am beyond excited about some of this ride. It's been minimal planning, but I just am going to some cool places. First and foremost, it's worth repeating. It's a memorial trip for my dad who passed away at the end of last year. The lake, he lived on the lake for the last 20 plus years. And that's been something that I equate to him because of that. So doing this is a nice bit of closure on that front. So there's that. It also checks off a lot of boxes. This is a new to me tour, because I haven't ridden around Lake Ontario. There will be some replication potentially on the back end of it, depending on how I decide to get from Niagara Falls / Buffalo back to the start / end point. The easiest thing, especially if I cross over in Niagara Falls, would be to basically ride to Lockport and then repeat the ride from Lockport to that town. And I think that will end up being the most likely thing. So there would be some replication, but there's also a road that parallels the towpath there, New York State Route 31, which might be doable as well. That's, I believe, for the most part, also part of New York State Bike Route 5. So we'll see. I don't have that kind of figured out at this point, but I do think that the new to me part is fun. International, of course. Now, I think I've misspoken multiple times on the show saying, oh, I've never ridden in another country. And then I realized, oh no, you've ridden in other countries before, my guy. But I've also ridden in Canada before. This is not my first time in Canada because for those of you who have been with the pod from the very beginning or you've heard the best ofs, of course, I started my Pacific Coast ride in 2014 in Victoria, BC, and spent a fair amount of time on that first day in Canada. This, however, will be my first time riding in the beautiful province of Ontario, which for all of my young life was really my only exposure to Canada was Ontario. I'm very excited to see it at the speed of bike. I'll also be going to places in Ontario I have never been to at all, largely the east side of that North Shore. I've never been to, so I'll be riding a bike through it. So that's exciting. And there's lots of cool places as well. I'm going to be doing some lakeside lodging in a few places. And when I say lakeside, I literally with a view of the lake. That's really exciting. And I think that's consistent with what I'm trying to do with this trip. I already mentioned multiple ferries, including an international crossing. So that's awesome. I did do a ferry crossing from Canada to the US, really both directions, because I had to get to Canada. But for the official bike tour part of it, I did some ferry crossings, international ferry crossings back in 2014. So this will be another revisiting of all of that. I think at this point, and I may end up changing my mind because the hotel I'm staying at in Wolfe Island looks really interesting. That's the first Canadian tour stop, for lack of a better word. But I'll be staying in Toronto. And I really was, how am I going to work this whole loaded bike thing with a truly urban hotel? And then I stumbled upon an Airbnb that I'm very excited about. It is out on one of the Toronto islands. And I have never been to any of the islands that are literally just in the middle of the lake, right off the coast there from the city of Toronto. And it looks awesome. And it looks like there's views of the city. And I am beyond excited about that. That might be the thing I'm most looking forward to. Although there's other things as well. There's Niagara Falls, maybe, probably, I think. Who knows? There's weird Tim tourism. If I do cross over in Niagara Falls, which I think I'm leaning to right now because of weird Tim tourism, here we go. Have you ever heard of Love Canal? Ooh, it sounds nice and love, right? No, it's a super fun site. And I'm interested in it because I remember as a kid, this became a big deal. Be ready for history talk on American pollution on that day of the ride. Should I do that? I'm literally going to go out of my way to go there if I can. And everything, there's also the possibility of the Erie Canal towpath. If I do ride that, I'll be taking a different route to the towpath in Lockport. Yeah, I won't be doing unless I decide to go to Buffalo and cross. That would give me that piece of the canal towpath that I have not ridden yet. So that's actually also an argument to cross there instead. Just as a matter of geography, for those of you who don't know Western New York, a lot of people think that Niagara Falls and Buffalo are like right next to each other, and they are, but not really. Niagara Falls is well north of the city of Buffalo, and the Niagara River separates, of course, Ontario from Western New York in that part of the state, and the ability to cross it is constrained. There's not as many bridges as you would think. I would have loved to have ridden to Niagara on the lake and just cross over right where the Niagara River meets Lake Ontario. That would be great because there's a Lake Ontario Parkway, which keeps going, and that would have been an awesome way to ride. There's no bridge there. None at all. You got to go south from there to hit Niagara Falls. You're in Niagara Falls, so there's that. Or you can keep going further south and end up in Buffalo, end up crossing into Buffalo. And of course, there's all sorts of cool things with Buffalo. #Go Bills. That is the highlights. I'm unreasonably excited about the things that I'll be seeing and doing. The riding, big question mark. I know people have ridden these routes. I know that there are good trails and good bike routes that are up there, but there are quite a few roads that are not marked as for cycling. So we're going to see how this all goes. I have not, for the most part, done very much of my tried and true Google Earth / Google Maps / Google Street View. So I'm going to be riding a little bit blind for some of these things. I have not loaded a lot of these routes into Ride It with GPS yet. So Tim, this is incredibly off brand for you. I've been very busy. Lots of things going on in my life. And so I haven't been able to prepare quite the same way. Even though I've said all these things and I've already gotten some lodging all set up, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see how this all goes. The challenges. Let's talk about the challenges because this ride has them. I'll start off with the distance. I'm going to be riding the e-bike, and because of that, I am going to be doing higher mileage than I've ever done in any trip. We're looking at some 90-mile days in there, and that sounds really rough to me because 90 miles is more than, it's about 20 miles more than anything I've ever ridden. I've done on an acoustic bike. I think my max in a touring day was 72. On the e-bike, about the same. So I'll be taking this e-bike and going a little bit further. And I remember at the end of that day on the shakedown ride, I was pretty cooked. But here's the thing. I had one battery and I was getting to the tail end of that. I was also mostly on a towpath surface. Here, I'm probably going to be on asphalt for, I'll say, the vast majority of the time, although I do know that there will be some kind of non-asphalt surfaces, some trails, and maybe even some dirt in some places. But I should be more efficient with how I ride. Also, because I have two batteries, I am not going to need to conserve, I don't think, really much at all. I think that I'll be able to have a pace of upwards of 20 miles per hour when I'm on asphalt, and as fast as any of the kind of multi-use trails will allow. Most of those will have a 15 mile per hour speed limit. I'll certainly be following all of those things, but when I'm on asphalt, I'm going to be trying to move as good as I can. And if battery power is not an issue, that should really shrink this challenge down. That 90-mile day may only feel like a 45-mile day, and that's not going to be so bad. The one thing I will say to counter that, though, is that often, as you all know, if you've ridden long distances, it's not so much the physical element of it, it's the time in the saddle. I haven't had any good long days since the February ride in Florida. And so as a result, that takes some getting used to, and I don't have time and haven't had time to do any real shakedown days. I'm hoping to get out today, literally after I finish recording this. It's a beautiful day and there's going to be rain for the next 2 days. So I would like to get out and just to give it a little bit more feel on both some asphalt, and I've done some asphalt riding, but I'd like to get on the C&O towpath, although it's pretty washed out these days. Shout out to all of you who are riding it right now, if you can, because it's closed in a bunch of places because of flooding. So time in the saddle is definitely an issue. The bike itself, look, I feel pretty good about it. I wouldn't do this ride if I didn't think that it was capable of doing it, but the bike hasn't proven itself to me. I think I said that before. Can it handle it? Sure. I think so. Maybe. So I got to make sure I've got some backup plans. I will say that I'm going to be in places, particularly when I'm in Canada, that I have no familiarity with. It's a very spread out until you get to a city called Oshawa. And then it's a very industrial area where sometimes industrial areas, you may as well be on the moon too, because there's just not a lot of services. So we're just going to have to see how it goes. I should double check and see if my Better World Club membership extends to help in Canada. That's actually really important to know. I will be looking that up, because if that's the case, that's a phone call and no problem. I've already secured an eSIM with a Canadian cell phone plan, so I'm going to be all set, no problem for communication and data and stuff like that when I'm up there. Definitely something that you need and want to be able to do. But the rural spots, I think, are going to be tough for a bailout otherwise, and there may be some waiting if there is a really serious mechanical. So yeah, we're just going to have to figure that all out. I do figure that the worst case scenario is if the bike just absolutely has a problem. And I no matter where I'm at, there is the possibility of either myself on the bike getting someplace like an Oshawa or a Toronto or something like that. And then I can always just get a train back to Rochester or near Rochester, and then basically go from there and get my vehicle, drive back up if I have to go get my bike, whatever is necessary. I think that I'm not on the moon. I'm just in Canada. And even though it's some rural parts, I think that there's going to always be an escape plan as necessary. I just don't know them as well as I used to, or I'm used to doing in other rides. A lot of the places that I'll be are unfamiliar, as I've mentioned before, in Ontario until about Toronto. I mentioned the city of Oshawa. I've never been to Oshawa. That's to the east of Toronto. Even Toronto itself, I haven't been there since well before COVID. It's probably been at least 10 years. And even then, it's new to me by bike. I've never ridden a bike in Toronto. There's some question marks there. And of course, I'm not even going to necessarily be in the city of Toronto all that much. A little bit depends on how quickly I get there. But I'm going to need to hop a ferry and get to the place where my Airbnb is. Now, it's great. The ferries run every hour and they run super late. So I'm not concerned about that. In fact, all of the ferries that I know I'm taking have great schedules and they run super late. So if I get a mechanical, if I decide to take a long lunch, if I'm just not feeling it and I'm riding late, if I get in like right at sundown, there's still plenty of ferries for me. So that's all good. So there's challenges, to be clear, but they're the kind of challenges that are going to make this a really fun kind of ride. One thing I'll say is, as part of the talk about the bailout and everything, I don't know if this ride I've bitten off more than I can chew. As of the moment, I have an extra day and I've only planned lodging through Toronto. At that point, that'll be midweek. I have to get back by Saturday. And that should be plenty of time. There's an extra day of riding at the kind of distances that I'm talking about here. So what that does is, if I do run into a problem, I do have that day in my back pocket. And on longer rides, I have found that is a really nice thing to have. I've had it where I don't burn that until late in the ride, and it's because I'm in a place I want to hang out in. I've also had it where I've needed to use it, and I wouldn't have been able to make it without having it. So I think at this point, that's probably a really good idea. Does that mean that I'm biting off too much with these 90-mile days? Yes and no. I think that if this e-bike works the way that I think it can with 2 batteries, this should not be a physical challenge for me, even not being in the shape that I would like to be in by this time of year. And it's going to help get me into that shape by doing this type of work. We talked about it with Biking Brian, and I think that this is correct in my experience too. But the idea is, with an e-bike, you can go twice as fast in half the time, roughly. And of course, there's some wiggle room there. But it feels like you're going that distance, that half distance. So let's say that it's a 90-mile day. By the end of it, it should feel like I've ridden about a 45-mile day, which is a pretty robust day, but it's certainly nothing that I haven't done before. I'm going to be putting a bunch of these together, so we'll just see how it goes. Of course, conditions, rain, all of that can have an impact too. But suffice to say, I think these challenges are all surmountable. I've got a bike that can do this. I think this is a great shakedown. I didn't, you'll notice, push the limits of things. I think that it's entirely possible with the second battery that my actual range, if I manage the power a little bit, could be upwards of 120 miles. I don't want to push it that far on a ride like this, but this will test how much battery I use, which will inform me for maybe longer trips. And if I do want to do 120-mile days, that's going to be certainly in the realm of possible. So we'll see how this all goes. In many ways, this is the final shakedown, even though it's a real adventure. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to take you along on the ride. Just as a quick note, places that I'll be, Oswego, New York. I think it's a shorter day for my first day because I'm going to see my mother as I ride away from Western New York. Oswego is close-ish to Syracuse, just to give you a sense of that. Well, of course, you can always look on maps as well. Wolf Island is that island that's it's in Canada, but it's a really interesting place for me to have the second day stop, and the hotel looks really cool and colorful. I struggled with the next one because spacing is an issue. I'll be in a place called Colborne, Ontario. I'm not sure if a lot of people in Ontario have heard of Colborne, but I'll be there at an Airbnb that is for truckers, apparently. That's how it's advertised, so I'm excited about that. And there's a Tim Hortons right there, and there's another place that looked really good, like kind of truck stop vibes, so I'm actually excited about that one. Then beautiful Toronto the next night. Then things start to get a little bit question marky. Niagara Falls is the next likely place, although I could stop short of there and end up in Hamilton or something like that. But I think I would stay, if I do get to Niagara Falls, I would stay on the Canadian side that night. Then if I do get to Niagara Falls by that day, I've got 2 days to get back, so I could really slow my roll, stay in Brockport again. If you followed for the Erie Canal Towpath Tour and the Empire State Trail Tour, I stayed in Brockport, very cool town. They're great. It was great for camping. I would stay at a hotel probably, and then end up at the starting point by Saturday. But depending on how things go, if I'm feeling really good and the bike is robust, I could be back by Friday night. So we'll see. We'll just see how it all goes. And things go sideways on my tours, as you all know. This is the plan. I am intending to circumnavigate. My goal is to get fully around, to start and stop by bike all the way around. But we also know things can go sideways, and we will just attack things as we can and enjoy this as much as possible. And just the fact that this is a new trip to me, I'm super stoked for it. And yeah, I think that's all I got. 30 some odd minutes plus of yammering away. Next week on the pod will be part 1 of the Lake Ontario circumnavigation adventure, and I'm super excited to bring you along for the ride. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.